Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema podcast. There's many things we've discussed before, and I want to sort of delve in to one of them. That is the idea of kosher and why our Creator gave us this very special diet. As I've mentioned before, I like to look at things from the top down, sort of the building blocks, then how everything sort of assembles together. And I've talked a lot about when you look at the Torah and the way Hashem created the world, it's also fractal. We learn from the Ramchal that Hashem made the world through the binary code of his revelation of himself and his concealment, or the illusion of his concealment. And all the mitzvos and everything we do are there to reveal Hashem in the world. That is our task. And he created the world with a spiritual realm that's there to facilitate the physical realm where we live, actualizing its task, which is to be co-creators and build this world and make it an environment holy like Hashem, where he can reveal himself. And you see this same spiritual, physical counterbalance played out in so many different ways. Like one of the things we'll be going into depth next week with my guest Rod Bryant is the fact that the reason Hashem created the world with mankind bifurcated between the B'nai Noach and the B'nai Mitzvah is because the B'nai Mitzvah, the Jewish people, are like the neshama to the body, which is the B'nai Noach. All are necessary. All are part of the divine plan. And when we look at ourselves, where the real work is done, we have this neshama in a physical body. And our task at hand is to elevate the body. It's quite a task. The body is so different, has such a different agenda from what our neshama wants. And when you look at the human body, what is so fascinating, when you delve down, and I encourage you to go research and look at what is taking place in each of our cells. We have trillions of them. It's like here we are supposed to be the king of our kingdom, and we got a trillion little separate cities that we call cells. And when you look at the cell, it basically has a membrane that acts as the city border. You have a nucleus that acts like City Hall. It stores information. It directs activities. You have these mitochondria that are like power plants. They generate energy to fuel all these operations going on in each of our cells. You have something called the endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes, probably butchering the pronunciation, but they function like factories. They're producing proteins and other essential materials. You have an item in the cell called Golgi apparatus that acts as a shipping center, packaging and distributing goods. The cell membrane, as I said, like the city border, controlling what enters and exits. You have waste management handled by the liposomes, breaking down and recycling old parts. And the cycloskeleton provides infrastructure, which is like roads and buildings. So it's really fascinating when you look at a cell in our body. It's like an independent entity, but yet we are the ones responsible for what materials go into those cells to build those trillions of cells that we have to elevate and take control over. And it's a hard task. We need our body to be on board. And one of those ways, of course, that is necessary, the Torah is holistic, and this goal is keeping a kosher diet. We know from the Torah that we're not supposed to consume the blood of an animal, and we also know that the nefesh soul of all living creatures is in the blood. So it makes sense that the Almighty said, don't consume the nefesh of another animal. You got your own nefesh to deal with. You don't need to add to the challenge here. And when you look at all the animals we're allowed to eat, those are described as having split hooves and that chew their cud. Something else they all have in common is they're all vegetarian. Their flesh that we eat is all derived from plant-based food. And so when we eat a kosher animal and the blood is removed, our cells are being nourished with the flesh, but not with the blood of the animal. And then when you look at the non-kosher food, like I'll tell you, when I used to eat non-kosher, and I used to go to a sushi restaurant, my favorite sushi, and this will probably make my guests cringe, was eel. I love the eel. But if you look at what an eel eats and what its flesh is made of, it's pretty disgusting. It eats insect larvae and insects and worms and mollusks. I mean, all these disgusting animals, and it's feeding its flesh through that. And then I'm consuming the flesh of an animal that built itself on that. So you can see that's not the best way to build my city of trillions of cells. By the way, on a side note rant, when it comes to sushi, because look, one of the things that we have to do to elevate this world is we have to make this world a world of emis, like in the heavens. Only truth, okay? Sushi is not vegetables wrapped in rice. Sushi is fish, okay? So let's only emis here, okay? If you're gonna invite me over for sushi, it has to have fish in it. But anyway, back to my point. We have to build our cells, our trillions of cells in the proper way, and that's why we have this diet. And I did notice something on how this actually impacted me. Like at first, people ask, like, do you feel any different? No, it's not like you're giving up sugar, reducing carb intake, and you see your energy level go up. I really didn't fully keep kosher until I moved to this community. We had a kosher kitchen, but we wanted to go out to eat in Kingwood, so we go to a restaurant. And when I traveled, I didn't really stop and really think how I would handle navigating travel and eating kosher. So I would go into a non-kosher restaurant, ask for a vegetable omelet. But what was in that frying pan before they made my vegetable omelet? Probably some bacon residue and everything else. So one of the things I noticed I never shared with you is when I started keeping Shabbos, there was parts of the day when I wasn't studying where I felt very uneasy. I could never figure it out. And it wasn't like that on Yom Tov, even though the laws are similar, except with the preparation of food. But since I'm not allowed in the kitchen, there's really no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos for me. But I always felt like this uneasiness. I never was embarrassed to share it. I knew if I had shared it with Rabbi Wolbe, he would have looked at me like, I don't get what you're going through. Even when I had moved here, I was like, there was parts of the day where I just felt uneasy, not on Yom Tov, but just on Shabbos. So I was telling Hashem, like, what is going on? What type of freak am I? Like, not like feeling total joy on Shabbos? And I came across a video of a rabbi who was a Baal Teshuvah, lived a unholy life like me. And he shared this exact same experience. He said, I hated Shabbos. I always felt so off because of it. And he said he went to talk to his rabbi about it. And his rabbi said, well, yeah, you don't have your ruach yet. And let me explain before I go further. We have a nefesh that resides in the blood that animates our physical body. We have these higher levels of soul. The most identifying part is the neshama. And Hashem blew a ruach into Adam's nose, and it bound the two together. And so what this rabbi was saying was that not only did his neshama not want to settle into himself, to his body, but his ruach wanted nothing to do with him. If you can imagine, you have a body made of trillions of cells, and you've been feeding it with this unholy garbage. The holy soul, the neshama, and even the ruach do not feel comfortable residing in it. But because Shabbos is the holiest of times, we are told that we get an extra soul. More of our soul is sort of drawn into us. And apparently with my current status, and because of how I had built my body, my ruach just was feeling very unsettled in such an unclean environment. And then what he said was that resolve it, just continue to follow the mitzvos, eat kosher, study Torah, keep Shabbos, and eventually goes away as it did for me. But at that time, when I knew what was going on, I remember there was the COVID pandemic, and everyone was afraid of this little virus. And I remember thinking to myself that if I had not eaten in several days, and someone said, you have two choices, a plate of kosher food, which is probably infected with the COVID virus, or a plate of non-kosher food without the COVID virus, I would have chosen the kosher food with the COVID virus. I'd rather have been sick for 7, 8, 10 days than to go backwards in this process of cleansing my body and building my city of cells as they die off and are rebuilt with cells built from the clean, kosher, holy diet. So as you can see, my friends, it's very important. Hashem knows what he's doing. So what I wanted to do today was bring on my guest, Rabbi Dubin, who is involved with our Houston Kashrut Association, and talk about and learn what is all involved. Because I'll tell you, I've taken a lot of it for granted. And I wanted to get some more insight on everything that goes in to ensuring that we are able to keep our kosher diet. We are able to build our kingdom of trillions of cells in a pure and holy way so we can accomplish the task, commandeering the body with our neshama and fulfilling our role in this world.
Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights, intertwined through personal stories, as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars, demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. Now to the show.
Rabbi Dubin, first, thank you for coming on the show. And second, I have to say, as I was thinking about this podcast over the last few weeks, I also owe you a big thank you for the work you do. Because I'll be honest, I've been sort of like a spoiled, entitled child. I come to this neighborhood, in this community, I have all these amazing kosher restaurants, places to get kosher food, and I never stopped and thought, who is responsible for making this happen? So thank you so much for ensuring that everyone in this community is able to eat kosher food.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So start with talking about a little bit about your background and the history of the HKA.
So my background, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and moved afterwards to Lakewood, New Jersey, where I got married and lived there for a few years. Then in 2014, I moved to Houston, Texas, to join the Kollel here, which is a group of scholars that are learning primarily during the day. And I joined that for about 2.5 years, giving classes and learning individually with different local people one-on-one. And then an opportunity presented itself to become the rabbinic administrator for the Houston Kashrut Association, the HKA, that was in August of 2016. And I always had an interest in kosher. I actually wrote a book, a Hebrew book on a certain very specific area of kosher, sort of like more of a much deeper scholarly work. It's meant for people that are preparing for their smicha exams. And it's just something that I spent many years on. So it was sort of a natural fit for me to take that.
Are you saying that's something a little too advanced for us lay people?
So it's not advanced for anyone. It's just it takes a little bit of prep work to get there, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So it's sort of meant for after people, like people that are learning in depth, like the commentaries and so on in the original text, in a very in-depth kind of way. It's sort of a guide and a deeper dive into a lot of those areas.
Okay.
But it's not really it's not so much of a reference or something for, like, even if you're a learned scholar, if you're not specifically focusing on that area of halacha, of Jewish law, then you wouldn't particularly find it interesting.
Right. Okay.
It's a very specific niche. Yeah.
It's like someone I want to be healthy, but I don't need to learn how to do cardiovascular surgery.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So you came here, and I want to get into everything. Why don't you talk about the organization and everything it's responsible for doing?
So the Houston Kashrut Association, like many cities, we have a local certifying organization. So throughout the world, there's approximately 1,500 kosher agencies, give or take. There's no barrier to entry to open up an organization. If you want to have a new Shema organization open tomorrow, you just have to file an LLC. And if you want to make a nonprofit, go through the 501c3 status, and you're open for business. Get yourself a nice logo, and you're good. So there really isn't any barrier to entry, and that's why it's really important to really know and be familiar with the specific agencies. Just as a tangential note, there are actually companies in Pakistan and India that will offer it to you, completely illegitimate kosher certifications for, one-time fee of $300 or so on and so forth. I found it on Fiverr. You can find it. And they even have very legitimate looking certificates. But we within the kosher world, we always have fun. We taking a look at those certificates, we'll figure it out in a second that it's a fraud.
So stop there. So how does someone know when you see, because I remember when I first started keeping kosher, I was looking for the hechsher on things. And I was in Specs, and they had, I forget what the item was, but I thought it was really weird that it was something with bacon and it had a hechsher. I said to Rabbi Cohen, he's like, no, that's not. It's nor. So how do we know when we see a hechsher, like, is this good or is this some phony made up scam?
Right. How would you know? It's probably one of the most common questions that I get. The first thing is we need to understand there's a few different categories. There are some hechshers. You could refer to it either as a hechsher, a hashgacha, kosher organization, certifying organization, supervising organization. These are all the same thing. There are some, a very small percentage, I would say, in the low single digits, that are just absolute scams. That's a very low percentage. And what's interesting is that a lot of these, if you're familiar with Hebrew, for example, you could open up, you could read through the certificate and you'll sort of figure out right away. As a matter of fact, I was just looking at a different one just the other day. Someone shared with me. So they must have got a logo somewhere online, and their logo actually, instead of saying the word kosher, which is spelled chaf shin resh kosher, they actually was spelled pesher, pei shin resh, which is nothing to do with kosher, and actually the word is a different Hebrew word, which means a compromise. So
well, that's truthful, at least.
It's truthful, right? Well, and as an aside, just as a funny anecdote, I actually interacted with somebody on Fiverr who was offering kosher certification services for $300. I think he was out of Pakistan. So I asked him, I said, I'm just inquiring about using your kosher services. I said, I'm looking to certify right now I have a non-kosher steakhouse in Manhattan and just wanted to know what it would take to get your certification. And so I said, are there any restrictions, anything I need to do differently? So they sent me back, no restrictions at all. You just have to make sure everything is clean and everything's okay. Send us your information and, of course, just pay, and we'll be happy to provide that for you. So there are scams out there. And I would say it's not something that most of us are encountering so much. I would say it's like a low single digit number. The vast majority are legitimate organizations in the sense that they are purporting and attempting to provide kosher supervision. With that said, because of the fact that there's no barrier to entry and there's no central supervising body, sort of like if you imagine like someone wants to be a lawyer, right? You have to have entry and jurisdiction within whatever state you're in, or if you want to be a physician, and you can't just put up a shingle. I mean, you could, but everyone will know that you're not part of that. So we don't really have that in the kosher industry. We have things that are similar to that, which we can discuss in a minute, but we don't really have that kind of central body that you need to be part of in order to be a legitimate organization. So what that means is that you have many organizations with various standards and various levels of, either both in the level of what their quality of their policies, the quality of their execution, their knowledge of the relevant laws and national standards and practices. You really have a full spectrum of all different kinds of levels. So when you see, and this is something which I discuss with people all the time, is when you see a kosher symbol that has Hebrew lettering, keep in mind that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything. Unless you know specifically what that symbol is, that means absolutely nothing. So that's just a very, very important starting thing if we're going to talk about kosher.
Okay. And how are we to know which?
So how are we to know?
Yeah.
So there is a central organization called AKO, A-K-O. It's Association of Kosher Organizations. They're not a supervising body in the sense of, you need to, in order to be part of it, and, they have entry in it, but it's somewhat of an indication that you're within the realm of mainstream. Not really, because it doesn't mean they're not sending anybody out to check how you're supervising your facilities. But they're generally speaking, and there could be exceptions, but generally speaking, it's an indication that you're sort of within the range. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who's not a member of AKO is not, because they could choose for whatever reason not to be a member. Like there are some really high quality organizations in Israel that are not part of it because they're running on their own track, sort of in Israel.
Right. They already have the reputation built with their audience.
Right. So we have AKO, A-K-O, and that's an organization. They do, we do fascinating stuff there. That's one. And they have a website, akokosher.org. You can check it out. in addition to that, there's various agencies that have recommended lists. So the one that we use specifically is from the CRC, Chicago Rabbinical Council, based out of Chicago. So they're a very, very high quality organization and a big leader in the kosher world. And they actually go through a tremendous amount of effort vetting organizations. So if you go to their website, and they have a few different websites, but CRC Kosher, I think it's crckosher.org or CRC Web, but you Google it, it'll come up right away. And you can check right away to see whether it's something they have you could Google it also, like CRC Kosher recommended list of kosher symbols, and you'll get a downloadable PDF. Now, again, that doesn't mean that if you're not on the list, it's not good, but it means that if you're on the list, that they vetted the organization. They'll actually come down very often to a city, and this is really something they do as a service. This is not like a money-making thing for them, and they do this as a service just to have people to have knowledge. So we at the HK, the Houston Kashrut Association, will generally follow their guidance on that. We'll follow their guidance, and we'll generally accept any agency that they accept, and so on. Just we don't have the resources to research more than that.
Do you know if they have like an app? So
They do. They do.
So when you're out and about,
yeah, it's on there too.
Okay,
they have
beautiful.
an app. And there are some agencies that, for whatever reason, are not listed on the list or the app, but if you call them, they'll pick up, a human being will actually pick up the phone and answer your question of whether or not it's a good agency or not.
Okay.
But the first step would be to just check the app or check the website, or that's a very good starting point.
Okay, great. I will put that link to that app in the show notes so everyone can download that and double check. The bacon flavored items at Specs Liquors is, I'm sure, not on that list. Okay, so that's very helpful. So is HKA involved in providing hechshers to different products or overseeing other elements of the kosher world?
So the way it works, and this is before I went on the tangent before, the way it works is that there are agencies that are primarily national or international agencies. Like the most famous one, obviously, is the OU, Orthodox Union, the U in a circle. So they're not locally based. I mean, they're based in New York, but they're primarily a international organization, and they're certifying, Oreos and all kinds of, brand name famous products. And, they control probably the vast majority of the market share of kosher. And you have a number of organizations, and, they're called like the nationals, not really national, really international, but you have a number of those. And then every city pretty much has a local certifying agency, because every city has their own dynamic, and you need to know the players, you need to know, what's available. And you also have to, the standards, even though the fundamental kosher standards are the same, but exactly what level of stringency and what resources you have and what kind of systems you need to create is really very subjective to the city and what the city can handle and what the resources are available. So it makes more sense operationally to have each city sort of have their own organization.
Right, because we have our own grocery stores, we have our own restaurants. Those need more direct supervision that can't be done from an organization in New York. Right.
And to add to that is also that in the food service world, there's no money made, right? It's really a losing proposition from a financial standpoint. So you have a restaurant that's paying, a few $100s a month for kosher supervision, and you can have a staff of, depending on what's necessary, 2, 3, 4 people, depending on what's going on. There ain't no money there, right? So the national organizations don't really have much of an interest in bringing on more debt by bringing on more small cities. And it's just, you have to know the dynamic. So like wherever you're going to go, you'll be in Houston and Denver and San Antonio, Dallas, wherever, any city pretty much, anywhere in the country that has a reasonably sized Jewish population, even a very small Jewish population, if they even have 1 or 2 restaurants, will generally have what's called a Vad HaKashrus. They'll have a local kosher agency.
Let's talk about restaurants since we're there. So what was new to me when I moved here was that there is someone in each restaurant that is employed by HKA to supervise the food production. Explain how that works.
Right. Yeah, so that's always a surprise to people that are not familiar with sort of the structure. So generally speaking, especially for meat restaurants, that's pretty universal. I wouldn't say completely universal. I mean, around the country, but it's, in Houston, we do require that for meat restaurants. So we have what's called a mashgiach, or or a mashgicha for a woman. So a mashgiach is for a man, or a mashgicha is for a woman. A kosher supervisor, that's what they are. So they go through training to be certified as a mashgiach. And on a separate note, I have an organization called Kosher Institute of America. We can touch on that soon if you want. It's not related in any way to the HKA. That's a certifying agency for mashgichim around the world. So they have to be trained. Once they're trained, we can, at that point, we have to train them on site. So there's an online training piece, and then there's a practical in-person training piece, and then they get certified as a supervisor. So what we require is for the meat restaurants that because of the high motivation, thank God we don't have that motivation, but I wouldn't say the motivation.
There's a profit incentive
to, the difference of a package of Tyson's meat versus kosher meat, it could be double, triple, or tremendous difference. And therefore it's become sort of the national standard that for meat restaurants for sure, and many places have for dairy restaurants as well. And that's sort of, for the dairy restaurants, it's a direction that we're sort of moving in that direction, but we're not there yet. But for meat restaurants for sure. So what happens is number one, we have a kosher supervisor, trained kosher supervisor who's on site at any point that the kitchen's open. But on top of that, they're actually the only ones that have the keys to the kitchen. So the owner of the restaurant actually doesn't have keys to their own kitchen. The only one that has the keys to the kitchen of the restaurant is actually the kosher supervisor. So the kosher supervisor comes first in the morning, opens up, and at the end of the day, closes up. So that way, it's very, very well controlled quality assurance department. It's sort of, if you imagine in a company, a company that producing pharmaceuticals, so the only one that would have access to open up the production area would be the quality assurance manager.
Right. But there's some restaurants you go into and you don't see doors to the kitchen.
Oh, so that's a great question.
Okay.
Some restaurants that don't have doors to a kitchen, or they can choose to have sort of an option B. Option B is what we have is we have locks on the fridges and freezers. And then in addition to that, we also install what's called a gas line lock, which we have a device that goes on the gas line. It's installed by a plumber. And at the end of the day, we shut off the gas line and we lock it. And then all the electrical devices also have a different kind of lock. It's called a plug lock. So basically, at the end of the day, the kitchen is technically open, but all the gas-powered devices, the gas is off to the entire store. And then the electrical devices are locked. The plugs are locked, so they can't be used. And then all the food is locked in a fridge and a freezer. So that's another option for those that it just allows them to clean up after the supervisor leaves and so on.
Right. Okay, so like in a steakhouse, this person would make sure that anything that goes into the freezer or refrigerator is kosher meat.
Right. So like, for example, what we'll do typically is, the chef or whoever, kitchen manager will go shopping, Restaurant Depot, or get a delivery from one of the kosher suppliers. And then typically what we have is they'll bring all the items in, they'll put it on a designated table, and then the mashgiach or mashgicha, kosher supervisor, will come. They have a marker, and they'll go through product by product and circle the hechsher to make sure that it's an approved one. And then once it's approved and circled, so then they'll stock it in the restaurant. They'll put it in, they'll put it into the dry goods department or into the fridge or freezer, wherever the relevant department is. So there's sort of multiple levels of quality assurance. So the first thing is nothing could happen when a supervisor is on site because they're the only ones that have access to the fridge, freezers, or the entire kitchen. And then when the products come in, it gets checked and approved only by the kosher supervisor, meaning anyone can do the shopping, anyone can do the delivery, but they're the ones that check it in, right? And then once it's checked in, and then you have the kosher supervisor. Now, in addition to that, we also have surveillance cameras for every one of our establishments, which I have access to as the administrator, which has been tremendously helpful. We can give you stories for the next hour of what we've been able to do with surveillance cameras. It's incredible. That is a requirement. You cannot be kosher certified without it. And so the idea really is that it's really a very, very high level quality assurance program. And generally speaking, it's not really working us against them. We're working as a team. Fundamentally, they want to be kosher and they want to do it right. And we're just making sure that nothing gets slips.
Right. And they know their customer base wants it. They need some, and it's easy for error. And like you said, there's definitely a big profit incentive You don't want to put a stumbling block before the blind, and we're all can get blind in that area. So that's great. So you said you don't do that in a dairy restaurant because kosher cheese is also more expensive than regular cheese. It's more expensive.
And so I would say that universally in a meat restaurant, most agencies would require to have what's called a mashgiach timidi, Temidi, mashgiach timidi, which means a mashgiach that's there all the time. For dairy restaurants, it's some and some. So in the bigger cities, the more established cities that have more resources, it's typically required. The smaller cities, it's less so. And what we've found is that the level of risk is lower than with meat, and it's just easier to track. That being said, we have our newer dairy restaurant does have mashgiach timidi, and it is a direction that I would like to go for, and that's sort of where I'm striving. I would love to be there, but you have to keep in mind that it brings on the mashgiach gets paid by the store,
right?
And that's a tremendous cost.
Yeah.
So as the city grows and the customer base grows and the volume and the revenue grows, it makes it more. We can therefore raise the level as well.
Right. So we have to balance as a community, making sure that everything's being properly supervised. But if we make it cost prohibitive for entrepreneurs to want to open up restaurants, as we are a tremendous beneficiary of a lot of great restaurants here, we have to balance that. So I assume that HKA is it predominantly funded through donations, or?
So that's a great question. So the way the structure of many out-of-town, like when I say out-of-town, means smaller, out of the larger Jewish community metropolis, usually the way they're funded is sort of two ways. One way is what we try to do is there's no money to be made on the food service side, which means the caterers, bakeries, things like that. We literally, every account we add, we're losing money. It's like a reverse business operation.
But they're paying for the...
So they pay directly for the mashgichim, but that's not money that we see.
Right, that just pays the employee.
That pays the employee, and that's it. We're not taking a cut out of that. That's just their thing. They pay a minimal fee of, anywhere between from $160 to $500 a month. And very often included in that, we're providing them with supplies and different things. And it's really, and we have staff because we have other staff that are sort of rotating in the different restaurants. We're answering questions and we're helping them source mashgichim, we're helping them train mashgichim and all kinds of things. So every restaurant that we add actually brings down our bottom line, which is in a very common misconception. Like people think
it's a bad business model.
It's a great business model as a nonprofit looking to help. So it's sort of like if you imagine, sort of like a food kitchen. Every new person that you sign on to come to your free food kitchen is more money that needs to be raised.
Right.
So that's sort of the way it is. So we do charge a minimal fee, but it doesn't come close to covering it. Not even close. So what we do, and this is our model, and this is many, many other organizations' model as well, is we try to get industrial contracts or more commercial contracts as well. So a commercial contract would mean, for example, something coming into the port of Houston and a tanker needs to transport kosher glycerin from the ship that it arrived in to a factory in Dallas. Okay. So that needs to be transported on a kosher tanker. So we have a system we can certify and kosherize that kosher tanker. And then there's, we will do rail cars, kosherized rail cars and holding tubs and other kinds of commercial kind of products that don't see not really consumer ended.
Right.
Or like a larger factory, different things like that. So
that's your more of your profit center to offset the local restaurant business.
Exactly. So the only reason, right. So fundamentally we're a nonprofit and, there's no extra money in the bank at the end of the month, but it's sort of, that's the only way that we're able to continue providing our services is because we have those industrial contracts. But in addition to that, we do try to promote for people to make donations or have, monthly donations or be a member or support us in some way. It's a community organization, and really the more resources we have, the more we could provide. It's like, right. It's really even from a selfish perspective. Like if people want more restaurants, it gives us the capability of, like I was having a conversation recently with someone that wanted to actually open a new restaurant. Right now, our resources are really, really tight.
Because how many restaurants do we have here now?
I don't know offhand, maybe 13.
Yeah, which is, most people from other cities no, we don't have that.
Right. So we have, I would say per capita, I think we probably have per capita of religious Jews. I would say we probably have more restaurants than any other city in the United States. Now, that's anecdotal. I didn't research that, but I'm pretty comfortable that it's probably either correct or close to correct.
It has to be. When you just look at 13 divided by, I don't know how many families are here in this community. It has to be even more.
I mean, if you go to other smaller communities, and I was I was recently in another city that has a, long-standing Jewish community for generations. They have, like one place that's open only till 4:00, and then the other place where you have to order the pizza in advance, and really, really, really minimal options. And we have an incredible amount of options, relatively speaking.
Yeah, that's something I totally took for granted. I just thought that was in every community. But you also have to oversee things like we have in our grocery stores, which is so nice. We have kosher butchers and places that are preparing food there, like you can get fish and chicken meat, and they don't come all packaged up. So you have to. How does that work?
How does that work? Yeah. So, for example, let's say in a store like H-E-B, which is you can explain to those outside of Texas what H-E-B is.
It's a huge, vast grocery store.
Yes, I think they have 450 locations in Texas or something.
But this one that's kosher, I mean, it's
over 100,000 square feet.
Yeah.
It's a massive store. So what we have there, we actually have 3 full-time mashgichim, kosher supervisors there, plus the manager of the store, who's also a religious Jew. He's not technically a mashgiach, but he's also helps out. So what we have over there is a very similar situation. So for example, the meat room has a code to get into. The only one that could open that code and has that code is the mashgiach, the kosher meat room. 2 kosher meat rooms. And then we have, so we have all kinds of systems that are set up. But again, keep in mind, we have 3 full-time kosher supervisors there just to keep track of what's going on. So it's a lot. It's really a lot. It's a lot to keep track of, but it's at this point a pretty well-oiled system. Most of our places. The challenge, and the biggest challenge that we have, is finding mashgichim. That is, I would say, the biggest challenge facing our organization. It's really the biggest challenge facing most organizations. It's an incredible, incredible challenge.
So that's interesting. Do you actively recruit?
So our challenge is 2 things. Is that in a normal business operation, if it's for-profit especially, is you can have the option of paying as much as you want to pay, and in order to get talent. So you can make an investment in talent that will help your company. For us, we're in a very weird setup because who's funding the mashgichim? The stores.
Right.
For them, they don't have any personal interest in having a mashgiach there, and they're not looking to pay more or get a better one generally speaking.
Right.
They want someone in order to fulfill their obligation of having a quality assurance person on site.
Right.
So, and the margins in the food service world is so low. It's very, very difficult to make it unless you're in a very high tourism area. It's very, very difficult to make it in the food service restaurant business. And even if you're making it, it's month by it's really not, as an aside, not a business you want to go into. It's not for the faint-hearted.
Right. And plus, just like you said too, even without the kosher supervision for a restaurateur to buy kosher food itself, and then have to mark up a reasonable profit margin when kosher food in raw form is already so much expensive. I talked about food inflation a couple of years ago. I wrote to investors you want to talk about food inflation? Start keeping kosher. Yours is nothing to me. But yeah, so it's already difficult.
So it's already different to run a restaurant. It's difficult to run even a non-kosher restaurant. It's difficult to run a kosher restaurant. Then when you put on that a whole extra salary. So we're paying our mashgichim $18 an hour, right? Now, $18 an hour doesn't pay your rent. It doesn't cover anything. But we don't really have the option of giving more because we're not the ones paying for it. It's the restaurants that are paying for it.
If they don't want to pay for it, then we don't have the kosher restaurants.
Right. And if we force them to pay for it and we say, okay, the minimum wage is $40 an hour, that's great. That just means that all the restaurants are closing down.
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost sort of, maybe targeting the people who are maybe retired but looking for some way of more of a service of the heart, contributing to the community.
I would say that the vast majority of the mashgichim that stay with us long term are idealistic. or people that are just looking part-time, to do something. I would say that idealism is really what drives it, because let's be real, it's a hard job. Quality assurance is not easy. You're always in a tough spot. So it's a hard job, and there's not much room for growth, I'll be honest, because...
Right, you're not climbing up the corporate ladder
right.
in this position. It's
right. So it's a really hard, and most of the people that stay with us long term is because they appreciate the work and they appreciate the concept. It's not just because they want a job. There's more to it.
It's got to be they're contributing to Jewish community's ability to have kosher.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's your selling point. That's a hard thing to put on Indeed,
Right, exactly. So it's either the young people who just need a little extra money while they're going to school, like my daughter and her friend, or
exactly.
people who are retired.
So anyone that's supporting a family, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Right.
And our hands, so for me, I'm spending a tremendous amount of time trying to recruit, but it's sort of like trying to recruit with my hands behind my back, because I can't offer more than $18 an hour because I'm not the one paying for it.
Right.
And we don't have benefits. We really struggle with that.
Yeah, it's a hard pitch for sure. So maybe the tactic is you got to raise money outside of that, maybe offset it with people donating to HKA to help offset the restaurateurs.
Yeah, so somebody had an interesting idea, which we never explored, but you have a nice showing, a nice listenership. I would love to hear if you get some feedback on this. Somebody had an idea to have an option of tipping the mashgiach. You have the option of tipping the waiter.
Right.
And maybe to show appreciation by offering, again, not like, it's not a forced gratuity, but like a gratuity for the mashgiach, for the work that they're doing.
Right.
That would sort of give like an extra added boost.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, they're not going to, if they're back in the back room at HEB, they may not get that. Maybe so at the front counter or the restaurant, you put out and promote that, support your mashgiach.
All funds go directly to them,
Easy to try out.
Yeah.
I also understood, this is sort of shocking to me, is that a kosher restaurant owner does not have to be Jewish.
There are some agencies that do require Jewish ownership, not from a Jewish law perspective. That's more like it's something always to keep in mind that very often with regards to kosher supervision, there are some things that are Jewish law, some things that are Jewish custom, and some things that are simple policy.
Okay.
So there are things I'll give you an example, right? When product comes in, it needs to be circled by a mashgiach. You're not going to find anywhere in any kind of book of Jewish law that requires circling a can of tomato sauce by a mashgiach when it comes into a building. But we know that that's a very, very effective way of maintaining control. And it's something that if a place is not doing that correctly, we'll write them up as not doing that correctly, even though it's not a Jewish law thing. It's just a practical quality assurance measure.
Okay. It's a way of implementing the
Right.
Jewish laws.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So from our perspective, we do not require, from an ownership perspective, a person could be non-Jewish, Jewish, not religious, or obviously Jewish and religious. Any one of those options are fine. We don't, from that perspective, we don't discriminate at all. For us, what's most important is a trust. I think that's really the fundamental. And I think what's important to keep in mind is that we have a supervisor on site whenever the kitchen's open. The kitchen is locked. We have surveillance cameras. In addition to that, we have separate visits by myself and others within our organization. But with that said, if somebody's motivated to bring in non-kosher, a restaurateur, they absolutely can. And that's a scary thought.
It is, because you do hear cases that have occurred where that happens. So if there's a will, there's a way.
There's a will, there's a way. And the example that I always give is, if you wanted to buy your wife a birthday present a month in advance of her birthday, would you have any difficulty hiding it somewhere for a month?
Right.
Not really.
Yeah.
Because you know that she's leaving now to go shopping, and that usually takes her about 45 minutes. And then tomorrow at 2 o'clock, she has an appointment, right? So once you know people's schedules, and once you know the restaurant, and once you know if somebody's sophisticated, our system does not prevent against con artists or somebody that's looking to commit fraud. I will say that if somebody's doing that on a regular basis, at some point, we'll catch them. But it's not built for that. And that's, I think, a very, very common misconception. We do not have the capacity to be the CIA of kosher. We're here we're working with the assumption that the owner really wants to do the right thing, and they're trying to do the right thing. Sometimes they maybe have a temptation to cut a corner here and there, and we're here to make it a little bit more difficult for them. And if it happens, we have the cameras and we can look and see what did happen. But fundamentally, we're not a forensic, spy agency who are able to prevent someone who's actively looking to commit fraud. We absolutely need. So you asked, what kind of ownership is needed. We don't require them to be Jewish or religious, but the trust factor needs to be there. We don't care what religion you are, but you have to be a trustworthy person.
Do you do any type, you mentioned you do visits to the store. Do you do them unannounced to help sort of safeguard that?
Yeah, so it's always unannounced.
Okay.
I mean, not always, but once in a while they'll know that I'm on the way. But generally speaking, the vast majority are unannounced. And very often we can visit, twice in one day, take a few day break. So it depends. Like the dairy restaurants we work on getting to every day because they don't necessarily have somebody on site. We do have cameras there as well, though. But the meat restaurants we'll usually get to, give or take, once a week. But that doesn't mean that if we came on Sunday, we're not coming for the rest of the week. Because once a week means if you take the whole year and sort of balance it out, we're probably there about once a week. But sometimes we could be there 4 times in a day and then skip a week. And right, so there's really no way of knowing when somebody's walking in the back door.
What about Pesach? Because that's got to be a lot of work to make sure that no hummus is being sold.
So that's really hard. But generally speaking, most of our places, we only have a few places that do Passover production. And
meaning most just shut down for Pesach.
Yeah, it's easier for most of them to just shut down for Pesach because what's involved with producing Passover production is just so complicated and so cost prohibitive. And the truth is that they have to prepare for their own family, and they want to be able to open up the day after, and they want to be open right up until Pesach.
Right.
So for many of them, the decision financially and emotionally, it's just like, we're not interested. And who's buying? So we do have, sometimes what we'll do is some places they'll rent an outside kitchen that will kosherize for Passover production so that they can continue their regular operation. And sometimes we'll actually kosherize their kitchen. Now, kosherizing their kitchen is a big deal. There's a lot that goes into it. It's hard work, but we have a team, we'll do it. We do it for a few of our places.
Okay, that makes sense that they typically shut down, especially since you only have a few days outside of Yom Tov when people can leave their home to go.
But we don't have any restaurants that are actually open on Pesach, on Passover.
Could you elaborate a little more on the training that you provide, the mashgichs that are there?
So Kosher Institute of America, kosherinstitute.com. So that's a separate organization that I founded in 2019. It's not affiliated with the HKA. And it was originally started, I actually think you were at my very, very first class that I gave, the first live class in Beit Rambam in 2019 maybe.
Yeah, I know my wife went out there.
I think you were there for at least one or two of them also.
I think so too, yeah. I know my wife, when she was ready to kosher her kitchen, came out there.
Yeah. So that was, that's when we did that one live. Ever since then, it's been, mostly it's online. So basically we have online courses. So it's all online courses. So this is really the first option, the first available, formal, comprehensive online kosher courses and education. There's four different kinds of courses. There's a course for home kitchen, which is the one that your wife was taking. She was taking it live, but it's an online at this point. So that's sort of meant for anyone that either never kept kosher before, doesn't even know what kosher is, or someone that's been keeping kosher their whole life, but sort of like your podcast, like giving insight and understanding and filling in all those missing pieces that you really don't know where to start from. So it's really built for both.
Okay, great. And I can provide links to those in the show notes so people can educate themselves. They're still learning the process. That's great.
Yeah. So that's been a great option. So from there, we actually created what's known as the ACO Mashgiach course. It's associated with ACO, AKO, Association of Kosher Organizations. And what it became was a lot of the organizations, because there's so many disparate organizations, everyone had their own training. Some of them were very significant multi-week trainings, and some of them were, come, I'll meet you at the restaurant and I'll show you what to do. So everyone has been dying for many years for sort of a centralized universal training that everyone of all organizations could be taking. So thank God I had the opportunity to create that. And yeah, it's been pretty incredible. Spent a very, very long time on creating it.
And so so now people all over the country can use your training for their mashiachs.
Correct.
Beautiful.
Right. So we have, so there's so many of the large agencies and many of the small agencies like the OU, the OK, the HUFK, the CRC, and many organizations throughout the world. We now have it available in Hebrew. We have it in Spanish, Argentina and Mexico and Chile.
Wow.
And
that's incredible.
South Africa, London. So it's really been all over the world, and thousands of mashgichim have been trained through the program. What's nice is that it's a universal program where the training sort of covers everything that they need to know. Video training with a pretty intense final exam, and every organization has their own edition of it. So it's customized to their their policies. So they take that course, they'll take it on their own time, on their phone, on the laptop, whatever technology medium they want to use. And then when they're done, they take that final exam. If they pass, then what they get is we have an international database of mashgichim. That's kosherinstitute.com/database. And they get listed in that database as a certified mashgiach. And it says which organization they got certified through. So let's say I took the course through the CRC in Chicago. It'll show you on that database. And then they'll also get in the mail, the organization will get a beautiful photo ID, like a license, like a hard plastic, photo ID with their name and their photo and so on, that they're a certified mashgiach. So that's it's something to show for themselves, and it's a real item. It also gives them the freedom that, if let's say I'm living in New York and I moved to Florida and I got certified as a mashgiach in New York, I can take that photo ID to Florida and I'd be like, here, I'm certified. Now they may say, we don't want to hire you anyway. We don't, you didn't pass our interview process, or maybe we want you to review a few other things, but at least they know that this person took the entire course and they're fully trained.
Right. They get the technical know-how. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that. I really never understood the scope of it. And like I said, I think it builds a tremendous amount of appreciation to those that are benefiting and knowing that we can sort of always have kosher food available. I think we should all consider supporting our local kashrut associations for the work they do. As you can tell, it's not a business model meant to generate profits. It's dependent on the community to support the organization to stay there for us. And I'll definitely put a link for those of you who want to just go through the personal kosher course and know the ins and outs of eating kosher, koshering a kitchen. I think you cover that too, correct?
So the starting assumption is that your kitchen is koshered.
Okay.
So meaning you've gotten to the point of you brought in someone, because koshering kitchen really takes a much, much, much higher level of training. So the starting assumption is that the rabbi came in last night and kashered the kitchen, and I'm starting on Monday morning with a kosher kitchen. What do I do?
Okay.
If that makes sense.
All right. So if you're in the Houston area and you want to kosher a kitchen, there's plenty of people I can get you in contact with to come out and supervise that for you. Or I'm sure wherever you are around the world, your local Orthodox rabbi can assist you in that. There's a lot more to it than meets the eye. I think that's a terrific resource. Rabbi Dubin, I appreciate so much you coming on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity. What a wonderful show. It's really incredible the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.